In the year 2000, Jack Welch retired as the most celebrated CEO in American history. Business schools worshipped him. Wall Street idolized him. Fortune magazine called him manager of the century. He transformed General Electric from a $14 billion industrial company into the world's most valuable corporation, worth over $600 billion. He walked away with a $417 million severance package, the largest in business history at the time. But 20 years later, the truth emerged. GE had lost $590 billion in shareholder value. The company split into 3 separate pieces just to survive. A forensic accountant who exposed Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme accused GE of $38 billion in accounting fraud dating back to Welch's era. And the SEC fined GE $200 million for misleading investors. Yet Jack Welch died in March 2020 with his reputation mostly intact, his $650 million fortune secure, and business schools still teaching his methods as gospel. How did the CEO of the century actually plant the seeds of one of the largest corporate collapses in American history? And why did his successor take all the blame? By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how Jack Welch's obsession with quarterly earnings, financial engineering, and short-term stock price destroyed one of America's greatest companies. If you're fascinated by the economic stories you slept through, the corporate scandals that shaped our world while most people weren't paying attention, please hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Legend Built. Jack Welch became CEO of General Electric in April 1981 at age 45. He inherited a company worth $14 billion. Solid, stable, boring. GE made light bulbs, jet engines, power turbines, and appliances. It was the kind of industrial company that had survived since Thomas Edison founded it in 1892. But Welch had a different vision. He wanted to make GE the most valuable company on earth, and he had a simple philosophy to get there: maximize shareholder value above everything else. His strategy was ruthless and revolutionary. First, he implemented what he called the number one, number two rule. Every GE business had to be number one or number two in its market, or it would be fixed, sold, or closed. Second, he slashed costs with a brutality that earned him the nickname Neutron Jack, like the neutron bomb that kills people but leaves buildings standing. In his first 5 years, Welch eliminated 118,000 jobs, 25% of GE's workforce. Third, he transformed GE from an industrial manufacturer into a financial services powerhouse through GE Capital, which would eventually account for nearly half of GE's profits. And fourth, this is the key, Welch became obsessed with quarterly earnings. Every single quarter, GE had to beat Wall Street's expectations, not meet them, beat them, and Welch would do whatever it took to make those numbers. He implemented forced ranking, the infamous rank and yank system, where managers had to rate employees on a curve, then fire the bottom 10% every year, regardless of actual performance. This created a culture of fear, internal competition, and short-term thinking throughout the organization. But on paper, it looked like magic. GE's stock price soared. By the late 1990s, GE was worth over $400 billion. By August 2000, just before Welch retired, the market cap peaked at over $600 billion. Welch himself became a business celebrity, commanding speaking fees of $150,000 per appearance. His autobiography became a bestseller. MBA programs taught the GE way as the gold standard of corporate management. What nobody understood at the time was that Welch hadn't built sustainable value. He built a house of cards using financial engineering, accounting manipulation, and unsustainable short-term tactics. And when he handed the company to his successor, Jeff Immelt, in September 2001, the timer was already ticking on a bomb that would eventually destroy $590 billion in shareholder wealth. Chapter 2. The Hidden Tricks. How did Jack Welch deliver perfect quarterly earnings for 20 consecutive years? The answer isn't genius management, It's accounting manipulation and financial engineering. And we know this because in 2009, the SEC charged GE with accounting fraud. In 2019, forensic accountant Harry Markopolos, the man who exposed Bernie Madoff, released a 175-page report accusing GE of $38 billion in accounting fraud dating back to 1995, right in the middle of Welch's tenure. And in 2020, GE agreed to pay a $200 million penalty to settle SEC charges for systematically misleading investors. Here's how Welch's system worked. GE Capital, the financial services arm, became Welch's secret weapon. It was essentially a bank attached to an industrial company, and it gave Welch enormous flexibility to move profits around. When GE's industrial businesses had a bad quarter, Welch could tap GE Capital to sell financial assets at a profit, book one-time gains, and smooth out earnings. He called it managing the portfolio. Investigators would later call it earnings manipulation. Welch also mastered the art of cookie jar reserves. During good quarters, GE would overestimate expenses and set aside reserves. Then, during bad quarters, they'd release those reserves to boost earnings. This violated accounting standards, but it allowed Welch to deliver smooth, predictable growth quarter after quarter after quarter. Wall Street loved it, stock analysts rewarded it, and Welch's compensation, tied to stock performance, skyrocketed. Then there was the acquisition strategy. Between 1981 and 2001, Welch spent over $100 billion acquiring hundreds of companies. Many were purchased not for strategic value, but for short-term earnings accretion. Buy a company, book the immediate profit boost, worry about integration later. This worked brilliantly as long as the stock price kept rising and GE could use its inflated stock as acquisition currency. But the most dangerous trick was GE Capital itself. By the late 1990s, this financial arm was bigger than Merrill Lynch. It held hundreds of billions in assets, made loans to everything from aircraft to commercial real estate, and engaged in increasingly risky financial engineering to deliver the growth Welch demanded. The problem: GE Capital's balance sheet was opaque, complex, and, as the 2008 financial crisis would expose, loaded with time bombs. Jack Welch created a culture where hitting quarterly numbers was the only thing that mattered. Managers who missed targets were publicly humiliated or fired. Managers who made numbers were rewarded, no questions asked about how they achieved them. This incentivized aggressive accounting, short-term thinking, and risk-taking throughout the organization. And when Welch handed the company to Jeff Immelt in September 2001, none of this was visible on the surface. GE was the world's most valuable company. Jack Welch was a hero, and the accounting tricks were buried deep in hundreds of billions of dollars of complex transactions. Chapter 3: The Poison Pill. Jack Welch retired on September 7, 2001 with a $417 million severance package, the largest in business history at that time. 4 days later, terrorists attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. The timing couldn't have been worse for Jeff Immelt, who'd just inherited the CEO position. But the real problem wasn't 9/11. It was what Welch had left behind, a company optimized for short-term stock price manipulation that couldn't survive in the real world. Within months, cracks appeared. GE's insurance division faced massive claims from 9/11. The dot-com bubble burst, crushing GE's technology investments. And GE Capital, Welch's profit machine, started showing problems. Immelt discovered that to maintain Welch's earnings growth, he'd have to continue the unsustainable practices. And for years he did. But the real poison pill was GE Capital's risk exposure. During Welch's tenure, GE Capital had grown into a $461 billion financial behemoth. It made subprime loans, it invested in mortgage-backed securities, it operated like a hedge fund attached to an industrial company. And unlike regulated banks, GE Capital faced minimal oversight because it was part of an industrial conglomerate. Welch had built the perfect vehicle to hide risk and manufacture earnings. In 2008, that vehicle exploded. When the financial crisis hit, GE Capital faced catastrophic losses. Commercial real estate loans went bad, subprime investments collapsed, credit markets froze, and suddenly, GE couldn't fund itself. The company's stock price, which had been around $40 in early 2008, plummeted to $7 by March 2009. GE's credit rating was downgraded. The company slashed its dividend for the first time since the Great Depression, and GE Capital required a $139 billion federal bailout to survive. Think about that. GE, the company Jack Welch built into the world's most valuable corporation, needed a government bailout larger than many countries' GDP. And this wasn't just bad luck or unforeseen market conditions. This was the direct result of Welch's strategy: maximize short-term earnings and stock price at any cost, even if it means loading the company with hidden risks. From 2008 to 2014, GE Capital's revenue shrank from $68.5 billion to $42.7 billion. The once mighty profit engine became an albatross. Eventually, GE had to dismantle most of GE Capital just to survive, but the damage was done. Between August 2000, when Welch's GE peaked at over $600 billion in market value, and 2018, the company lost $590 billion in shareholder wealth. Retirement accounts were devastated. Employee pensions became underfunded. And Jack Welch? He collected his $417 million severance, wrote books defending his record, and lived comfortably as Jeff Immelt took all the blame. Chapter 4. The $590 billion collapse. Jeff Immelt served as GE's CEO from 2001 to 2017, 16 years of trying to save a sinking ship while being compared to the legend who sank it. When Immelt took over, GE's stock traded around $49 per share, and the market cap was still near $500 billion. When he left in 2017, the stock traded at $60, but after a reverse stock split, that meant the real price was dramatically lower, and the market cap had collapsed to around $60 billion. But the full scope of the disaster didn't become clear until after Immelt left. In August 2019, Harry Markopolos, the forensic accountant famous for exposing Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme years before regulators acted, published a devastating 175-page report titled General Electric, a bigger fraud than Enron. His conclusion: GE had committed $38 billion in accounting fraud, primarily by hiding insurance losses and manipulating reserves. And this fraud, Markopolos argued, dated back to the Jack Welch era. Specifically, Markopolos alleged that GE was hiding $29 billion in long-term care insurance losses and $9 billion in reserves shortfalls. The company, he claimed, had been using the same accounting tricks Welch pioneered: moving numbers around, releasing reserves when convenient, hiding problems in complex financial structures. GE stock dropped 11% in a single day on the news, the worst one-day percentage drop in 11 years. GE denied the allegations and called Markopolos' report market manipulation. But the damage was real. Just 5 months later, in December 2019, the SEC announced charges against GE for systematically misleading investors about its power and insurance businesses. The investigation found that from 2015 to 2017, GE had misled investors about its earnings and cash flow. In December 2020, GE agreed to pay a $200 million penalty to settle the charges without admitting or denying wrongdoing. But here's the most important part. While the SEC focused on Immelt's era, the accounting practices it punished were the same ones Jack Welch had institutionalized. The culture of hitting quarterly numbers at any cost, using reserves manipulation, smoothing earnings, these were Welch's innovations. Immelt had simply inherited a broken system and kept it running as long as he could. By 2021, GE announced it would split into 3 separate companies: GE Aerospace, GE Vernova for Energy, and GE Healthcare. The once mighty conglomerate that Jack Welch built couldn't survive as a single entity. The split was completed in 2024. The combined market value of all three companies, nowhere near the $600 billion Welch left behind. $590 billion in shareholder value, gone. And Jack Welch's legacy as manager of the century remained mostly intact because he died in March 2020 before the full truth came out. Chapter 5. The Unpunished Architect. Jack Welch died on March 1st, 2020 at age 84. His obituaries were glowing. The New York Times called him a business superstar. CNBC praised his legendary tenure. Business leaders around the world paid tribute to the man who transformed GE into a powerhouse. And Welch's net worth at death, approximately $650 million, accumulated through GE stock, his $417 million severance, speaking fees, book deals, and consulting work. He faced no criminal charges, no SEC investigations during his lifetime, no clawback of his compensation, despite GE's eventual collapse. He lived comfortably in Florida, gave interviews defending his record, and maintained that his methods were sound. It was his successors who failed, and for years much of the business world agreed with him. But starting around 2018, a re-evaluation of Welch's legacy began. David Gell's 2022 book, The Man Who Broke Capitalism, argued that Welch's shareholder-first philosophy, short-term thinking, and brutal cost-cutting didn't just hurt GE, it poisoned American capitalism itself. Welch's disciples went on to run dozens of major companies, including Boeing, Home Depot, Chrysler, and Albertsons. And at many of these companies, they implemented Welch's methods: forced ranking systems, obsession with quarterly earnings, cost-cutting over investment, financial engineering over building products, and many of these companies struggled or failed. Boeing, led by GE alumnus Harry Stonecipher, shifted from an engineering culture to a financial culture. Cost-cutting and outsourcing led to quality problems that eventually resulted in the 737 MAX disasters. Home Depot, under GE veteran Bob Nardelli, implemented forced ranking and aggressive cost-cutting that damaged customer service and employee morale. The pattern repeated across corporate America: short-term profits at the expense of long-term health. Meanwhile, Jeff Immelt, the man who tried to save Welch's broken creation, became the scapegoat. He was forced out in 2017 with a $211 million retirement package that many considered obscene given GE's performance. But unlike Welch, Immelt faced intense criticism, investigations, and blame. GE even considered clawing back his compensation after discovering he'd used a private jet for personal travel. Today, Immelt works as a venture partner at New Enterprise Associates and sits on corporate boards, but his net worth of around $150 to $211 million is a fraction of Welch's fortune, and his reputation never recovered. The victims of Jack Welch's legacy weren't wealthy CEOs, they were the millions of shareholders who watched their retirement savings evaporate, the GE employees whose pensions became underfunded when the company struggled, the 118,000 workers Welch fired. And Jack Welch himself? He died wealthy, celebrated, and mostly insulated from accountability. He never had to answer for the accounting manipulation, never had to explain why his perfect company collapsed so spectacularly after he left, never had to return $1 of his $417 million severance even as shareholders lost $590 billion. Chapter 6. Lessons in Billions. The Jack Welch story isn't just about one CEO and one company. It's about a philosophy that infected American business. Maximize shareholder value in the short term, no matter the long-term cost. And it's about why that philosophy is so dangerous. Here's what you need to understand. Welch's methods looked brilliant when the stock price was rising. Beat earnings every quarter? Check. Grow market cap from $14 billion to $600 billion? Check. Make shareholders rich? Check. But it was all built on unsustainable practices. Accounting manipulation? hidden risk in GE Capital, forced ranking that drove out institutional knowledge, cost-cutting that gutted R&D and long-term investment, acquisitions for immediate earnings boost rather than strategic value. When you optimize a company for quarterly earnings, you sacrifice everything that makes a company healthy long-term. And here's the scariest part. For 20 years, Jack Welch was rewarded for all of this. Wall Street loved him. Business schools taught his methods. Other CEOs copied him. And by the time the truth emerged, Welch was retired with hundreds of millions of dollars, insulated from consequences. What can you learn from this? First, be skeptical of companies that beat earnings estimates every single quarter. That level of consistency is almost impossible without accounting manipulation. Second, watch out for CEOs who emphasize shareholder value and quarterly earnings above all else. That's a red flag that the company is being optimized for short-term stock price rather than long-term health. Third, understand that forced ranking systems, mass layoffs, and aggressive cost-cutting might boost profits temporarily, but usually damage companies long-term. And fourth, this is crucial, corporate collapses aren't always about external market forces. Sometimes they're about internal decisions made by celebrated leaders who optimize companies for their own enrichment rather than sustainable success. Jack Welch left GE in 2001 as a hero with a $417 million severance. Welch died wealthy and celebrated while his successor took the blame, and shareholders lost everything. The Jack Welch story is the story of American capitalism's turn toward short-termism, financial engineering, and shareholder primacy at the expense of workers, communities, and long-term value creation. And until we recognize this pattern and demand accountability for CEOs who build houses of cards, it will keep happening. GE was once America's most valuable and respected company. Jack Welch turned it into a $600 billion illusion. And when the illusion collapsed, he was gone, his fortune intact, his reputation mostly protected, while millions of ordinary investors paid the price. If stories like this fascinate you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, because we're just getting started with these financial, educational mysteries.